Yeah, so the title of this is No More ETL, and hopefully no one is, no more ETL bullshit. Because this has been the case where, I've felt this, I think everyone has felt this. When I talk to people, you feel the energy, it's just frustration. So start with this. I have this feeling that something is wrong with data. Something is wrong with the state of data. I think we all feel it, right? When we try and implement a new dashboard, when we have changes come down the line, when anything has to change, or whenever we try and do anything new with data that we didn't think about ahead of time, there's just this frustration. And we come to this idea of it shouldn't be this hard. Why is it this hard? It seems harder than it should be. I call it a data paradox. This quote on the top is actually almost verbatim from being in an executive session. And there was an acquisition that happened, and the CEO was like, well, we want to change our monthly active user. And the head of data at the time there in this meeting was like, that'll be 6 months. And he was like, how is it 6 months? Don't we have this data? Doesn't this data exist? How is this possibly 6 months? It's just that frustration again. Why is it this hard? Why is it this hard? So I think we're trapped in a matrix of our own design. And I think the heart of the problem is deceptively simple. It's actually the pipeline. The pipeline is the problem. If you talk to anyone about their data infrastructure, any data engineers, even the data analysts, they'll start to talk about their pipelines. And you'll hear some interesting things when they talk about their pipelines. They'll say, okay, well, that's the BI pipeline, or that's the ML pipeline, or that's the XYZ pipeline. And it's like, oh, there's something interesting happening there. So what is a pipeline, right? Most of us are probably aware of this. You've got some kind of ETL thing, right, that you operate on as a unit. Why is this the core of our architectures? Why do we build everything out of this pattern? Because in the beginning, we had one database. We're talking about in the 70s. We had the one database that we ran our businesses on, we ran our inventory on, we ran our ERPs, whatever. And this is, again, the 70s. SQL's new. It's exciting. We can ask ad hoc questions. We can start to learn about our business. And we learned pretty quickly that if you do ad hoc things against the database that's running your business, you're in for pain. I'd be curious to see what happened with the first person that ran a cross product on their production database and created, ground everything to a halt. And so what did they do? This is in the 70s. They're like, you know what? Let's get another database. We'll get a second database, and we'll do a nightly dump. When things are quiet, when we're not active, not tons of stuff happening, we'll do a nightly dump and we'll copy it over into another database. And then we'll run all that ad hoc stuff over there, and it'll be isolated and we'll be great. And then we're talking about maybe the 1980s. Someone had the brilliant idea. They said, hey, you know what? We've got a second database. It doesn't have to look like the first database. We can remodel it. We can do things with the shape of the data to make these queries faster, to make them more efficient. And this is literally the birth of the data warehouse. It was in the 1980s. You do a nightly dump, you model the data, you write it into your warehouse. What is this? This is the pipeline. This is the pipeline. This is where it comes from. You've got a source, you do some kind of extraction, you clean or model it, you load it, and you put it into your warehouse. We've continued to build on this, and this literally arose 40 years ago, and we're still using this as the core of our infrastructure. We're partying like it's 1985. The pattern hasn't evolved, and if you think about the way we use data today, it doesn't map to that old pattern of a single database and a single warehouse. We have all sorts of use cases, and so we haven't evolved this core piece of how we build data infrastructure. So what's wrong with the pipelines? The problem with the pipeline today is that that old pattern encodes in it all sorts of assumptions about how we use data and what we do with the data. And I'll just go through a few of them. One is this pipeline model creates this operational and analytic split. And the entire industry has been organized around this, that there's these two complete different universes, the analytic universe and the operational universe. And there's all sorts of tools and things that have been built to solve the same exact problems in the two spaces, but in slightly different ways. And the pipeline is like the portal between these two universes. Why is this the case? Why is this set up? Because of the pipeline. Another thing that's encoded in here is that data is extracted. It's in the E and the ETL. We extract data. We pull data right? The source is just like the bone you need to extract the marrow from, right? That team is not part of the process. They're just a thing out in the universe that you pulled it. This is encoded in the idea of pipelines. The fact that we do batches, that's the nightly dump. It's the nightly dump, and we're still doing batches because we're living in this echo of the 1980s. What's another problem? All pipelines are point to point. You've got a source, you've got a destination. You've got system A, system B, right? And the other like insidious thing here is that the use case is encoded in the pipeline. And like I mentioned it earlier, people say it's the BI pipeline. This thing was designed for specific use, and it's point to point. We need to put this stuff into our analytic database. Another thing that's encoded is everything is one way, upstream, downstream. Everything goes one way. I have this like splinter in my mind, like the Morpheus slide, when there's a whole industry segment called reverse ETL. What the hell is reverse ETL? Why is that a thing? Why does that make sense? It's because there's only one right way that data is supposed to flow. Is that how we use data today? Another thing that's encoded in the pipeline is that there's a single place to put your data, the warehouse. Again, this is the echoes of the 1980s. We put everything into one system. Or now it's everything into Snowflake or everything into Databricks, but it's like, let's put everything into one system because this whole pipeline model is incredibly complicated and a pain. So what's happening, right? This isn't our world anymore. We don't have a single database. We don't have a single analytic, target. This is the world we have. We have an explosion of sources. We have an explosion of destinations. We have an explosion of use cases, and they're changing all the time, right? They're changing all the time. That rigid, structured pipeline model is ruining our data infrastructures. It's layering on us conceptual inertia, like I said, from the 1980s. We've built all of our data infrastructure and a lot of our systems predicated on the idea that getting the data is the hard part. Getting the data is the hard part. So let's make sure we put it all into one place because getting it, once we get it, we don't want to have to do that again because that was so hard. Like what if getting the data was the easy part? How would you change? How would your mental model change? So if the pipeline is the root of all evil, right? in my universe, the pipeline is the root of all evil, what do we need to do? We need to break the pipeline. We need to break apart this whole idea and break it up into separate pieces and try and get rid of all of those baked-in assumptions that are in the pipeline. And so how do you do that? What do you do to break apart a pipeline? You take these ideas of ET&L and you make them their own pieces, their own processes. So what would happen if you could collect data, stream data out of sources, stream data out of databases, stream data out of analytics sources, and store it in an immutable log? You don't have a use case. It's not directional. There's not all, you're trying to keep it as close to the source-aligned data as possible in the domain in which it came in. You don't have to coordinate systems. You can store this data immutably, and now you can replace ideas of state with these time-ordered immutable logs. So then what do you do? So you have this data now in this central thing, in this immutable format. Now you can take that and stream that out into your target. But what's interesting, already with this model, now you have this flexibility where you don't have to set everything up and then go, and then in the moment anything breaks, you're in pain. You could wait. You could spin up your destination later. You can pause the destination. You have a lot of flexibility to control both the source and the destination separately. If you run these two things in parallel, you've sort of created the pipeline, right? You're collecting data, you're storing it in this immutable log, you're emitting it to, say, a BI use case. So great, we can do this today. But what does this enable that the pipeline doesn't let you enable? It means you can take that same data without having to recollect it, without having to reanalyze it, and emit it to other destinations, to other use cases. That splinter in your mind when someone says, hey, can I use that data from the BI pipeline in my ML model? And you can do that in 10 minutes. How does that change things? How does that change what you can do in your company? I have a new crazy idea for a product, and if I could take this data and feed it, I just want to try it, I just want to experiment. Again, it's not 3 months, it's not 6 months, it's 10 minutes. You can materialize it. I want to query this data in a completely different form. I don't want to do an analytic query, I want to do a graph database, or I want to do some kind of index or a search search engine, anything. You can create an infinite number of views of the same data, all with a lightweight transformation for that specific use case, all in minutes, not months, not years. When you break out of this idea of rigid point-to-point pipelines, where everything has to go one way, connect to one system, you can break out of this model and move to more of a hub and spoke model, right? Oh, sorry, spam calls. You can move to this hub and spoke model, right? Where you have all of your destinations and your use cases become peers, right? And you don't necessarily have to have just a source. Why doesn't data, you could take data and feed it back into Salesforce. You can take data and move it into systems. There's no longer this conception of, oh, this is only ever a source, this is only ever a destination. It becomes much more of a network. And the more data that you add, the more valuable your data becomes, right? Because the more use cases become emergent on this. So I'm calling out, I'm using a little bit of matrix metaphors to free your mind, because we literally, it's hard for us to think of a different world because we've had 40 years of the pipeline. It's hard for us to think that there is a different way. With Matterbeam, like we've designed it in a way, because we know it's hard for people to get there, to start fast, low commitment, solve one use case. You can integrate using your existing systems. And then what we've seen with our customers is they start one use case. Oh, this is kind of like Fivetran. I'm just going to move data from A to B. And then they experience this revolution. They're like, oh, wait. Now I can use this data for this product initiative that's been backed up for 3 months, and I can do that in 10 minutes. We've had customers literally take 2-year migrations and shrink them into months, because now they can use this data in new shapes and new ways. Like I said, this is real world. One of our customers literally had this quote: "We've changed our whole company strategy based on what we can do with Matterbeam." When people are like, isn't this Fivetran? This is not a statement you get from a new Fivetran or from a different way of doing a pipeline. This is a completely different way of interacting and using your data. They cut years off of a migration. They started finding all these use cases, and then they came to us and they said, we know we're an early customer. We want to lock in this sweet early customer pricing. We want a 3-year commit. They asked us for that. So my clarion call is no more ETL bullshit. Let's get out of this world. Let's stop dealing with these rigid pipelines. You know, there is no pipeline. If you move to this new world, there is no pipeline anymore. There's just data, and data that you can use when you want it, how you want it. So see how deep the rabbit hole goes? Talk to us. We're looking for new customers. You can start small. You don't have to rip and replace. You know, if you're Databricks or using Databricks, we can work with Databricks. We can work with everything. But I challenge you, once you start using this model, you'll see that it really does change what's even possible. Like our customer, our one customer that was in the slide there, they literally said, we had projects that we weren't even going to try and do because we thought they were impractical or impossible, and we're now doing them. So that's what I got.